Let me tell you something about fear. Real fear doesn't shout. It doesn't roar or bare its teeth or make a big show of itself. The things that should actually scare you, the ones that could end you in the space of a single breath, those things are usually quiet. They sit at the back of the room. They watch. They wait. And by the time you realize what you've been sitting next to, it's already too late. I learned that lesson on a school station orbiting a dead star called Velo's lantern. And I learned it from a girl who never said a single word. My name doesn't matter much. I was a translator, third rank, assigned to the Coalition Education Exchange. Think of it like this: 100 species, 1,000 worlds, all of them throwing their young people into the same melting pot to learn how to not kill each other. Diplomacy through homework. That was the idea anyway. I was there to help the humans, since I'd spent years studying their languages and their strange, stubborn little ways. The coalition figured a familiar face would help them settle in. There were only 3 of them, 3 humans on a station of 9,000 students. And one of them was her. I want you to picture the station first, because you can't understand what happened without seeing the place. Velo's lantern education spire wasn't beautiful. People always imagine alien architecture as these gleaming silver towers, all curves and light. This was the opposite. The spire was old, built by the Threm, who'd been dead as a civilization for 9,000 years, and just sort of inherited by the coalition the way you inherit your grandmother's house. Big, drafty, full of corridors that didn't lead anywhere and rooms that hummed for reasons nobody could explain. The whole thing hung in the dark next to a collapsed sun. No daylight, just the slow purple shimmer of the dead star's corona washing through the long windows, painting everything in this bruised, underwater color. The air recyclers had a smell to them, metallic, a little sweet, like blood you can almost taste at the back of your throat. You stopped noticing it after a week, mostly. And the sound, that's what I remember most. The spire was never quiet. It groaned. The old hull plates expanded and contracted as we drifted through the dead star's heat tides, and at night you'd lie in your bunk and hear the whole structure settling around you. These long, deep moans, like the station was an animal that hadn't quite finished dying. 9,000 students, 40 species. I'd worked stations before, but nothing this crowded, this loud. The dining halls were chaos. You had the Vor, these big armored things, 7 feet tall, who clattered when they walked. You had the Sethu, who communicated in flashes of bioluminescence and got offended if you stared. You had the Klesh, the Anari, the Dravani, the whole catalog of the galaxy's promising youth, all elbowing for table space and gossiping in 40 languages. And then you had the humans, tucked in a corner, keeping their heads down. There was Marcus, a broad kid from somewhere called Manchester, who talked too loud and laughed too much because that's what scared people do. There was Priya, sharp and watchful, always with a tablet in her hands, the kind of person who survives by understanding the rules faster than anyone else. And there was Nell. The first time I really noticed Nell, she was sitting alone, eating a ration cube very slowly, and 3 Vor were standing over her. Now you have to understand the Vor. On their homeworld they hunt in packs across frozen tundra. They're not evil, not exactly, but they're built to test the herd. They find the weak one, the small one, the one alone, and they push. It's instinct. The 3 standing over Nell were doing what came naturally, circling, looming. One of them had picked up her water flask and was holding it just out of reach, the way a bully does, waiting for her to jump for it. She didn't jump for it. I started across the hall to intervene. It was my job, after all. Smooth over the cultural friction, prevent an incident, file the report. I'd done it a dozen times that month. The humans were small and soft, and everybody knew it, and the bigger species couldn't help themselves. I didn't make it in time, but not for the reason you'd think. The lead Vor leaned down, all teeth and breath, and said something in the trade tongue. Something crude. About how humans were supposedly so tough, weren't they? That's what the briefing said, the scary new species, and look at this one, look how small, couldn't even fight for her own water. Nell looked up. That was all. She just looked up, and the strangest thing happened. The Vor stopped talking. I was close enough to see it now, Nell's face. And here's what stuck with me all these years, the thing I still think about. There was nothing on it. No fear, obviously, but no anger either. No defiance. No challenge. Her expression was completely, perfectly empty. She looked at the Vor the way you'd look at weather. The way you look at something that is happening but that has nothing to do with you. She held the look for maybe 3 seconds. The Vor put the water flask down, carefully, lined it up next to her tray like he was apologizing without knowing how, and then all three of them just left, walked away fast, not looking back, their claws clicking double time on the floor. Nell picked up her flask, took a sip, went back to her ration cube. I stood there in the middle of the dining hall feeling like I'd watched something I didn't have the senses to understand, like a sound played just above my range of hearing. I went back to my table, and I didn't file a report, because what would I even have written? 3 large predators voluntarily backed away from a small, soft girl who did nothing. I told myself I'd imagine the strangeness of it, kids' posture. The Vor got bored, that's all. I was wrong, but it would take me a long time to understand how wrong. Let me tell you what we knew about humans, officially, back then. Almost nothing. Earth had only made contact with the Coalition 11 years before. 11 years. In galactic terms, that's nothing, that's an afternoon. Most species spend centuries being studied, cataloged, understood before they get a seat at the table. Humans got fast-tracked and nobody could quite explain why. The official line was that they showed exceptional adaptive potential. That's bureaucrat speak. It means we don't understand them and they make us nervous. There were rumors, of course. There are always rumors. People said humans could survive things that should kill them. People said their homeworld was a death planet, that the gravity was crushing, the predators enormous, the climate hostile, and that humans had clawed their way to the top of all of it with nothing but soft bodies and stubbornness. People said they didn't have the proper instinct to give up. That when a human's body should surrender, the mind keeps driving it forward, past pain, past damage, past the point where any sensible creature lies down to die. I didn't believe the rumors. I'd met the 3 humans on my station. Marcus laughed too much. Priya worried too much. They seemed fragile to me, honestly, soft, the kind of beings you wanted to protect. That was my mistake. I was looking at them the way you'd look at any other species, measuring them by their size, their teeth, their visible weapons. I didn't understand yet that the most dangerous thing about a human isn't anything you can see. It's what they're willing to do. Nell was 16 in human years. She'd come from a place called the Patagonian Reclamation Zone, which I later learned was one of the harshest inhabited regions left on Earth, a windswept end-of-the-world place where people lived hard and quiet. Her file was thin, almost nothing in it. Parents listed as deceased, environmental, skills listed as general, behavior noted as nonverbal, cooperative, no incidents. Nonverbal, that was the word they used. Nell didn't speak. Not couldn't, the medical scan said her vocal apparatus was perfectly functional. She just didn't. Hadn't for years, according to the few notes that existed. Nobody knew why. Some trauma, the counselors assumed, some loss in that brutal childhood. They tried to draw her out at first and then they gave up, the way overworked people do, and she became just another quiet file in a station full of louder problems. I made it a point to sit near her sometimes. I'm not sure why. Maybe because that empty look she'd given the Vor had crawled under my skin and stayed there. Maybe because I felt sorry for her, this silent girl in a screaming place. I'd sit a couple of seats down with my own meal and I'd talk, just a little, just filling the air, the way you do. I never expected a response and I never got one. But she listened. I could tell she listened. She had these dark, steady eyes that tracked everything in the room, all the time, and when I spoke, some part of that attention would settle on me. Not warm exactly, just present, like being noticed by a still pond. One time I told her about my own homeworld, about the floating reed cities of my people and how I missed the sound of the tide bells. She didn't react. But the next day, in the common area, somebody had left a small folded shape on the table where I usually sat, folded from a ration wrapper. It was a bell. A tiny, crude, perfectly recognizable bell. I never saw her make it. I never thanked her because I knew somehow that thanking her would be wrong, would break something. I just kept it. I still have it. It's sitting on my desk as I tell you this. I want you to remember that. The same hands, I'll come back to it. The trouble started about 2 months in, and it started with a boy named Corin Vault. Corin was Dravani. The Dravani are an old, proud, wealthy species, and Corin was the kind of young man who'd never been told no in his entire life. His family essentially owned a moon. He came to the spire with an entourage, with custom quarters, with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never once faced a consequence. Tall, handsome by Dravani standards, all silver scales and slow smiles. He was charming when he wanted something and cruel when he was bored, and he was bored a lot. Corin had decided early on that the humans were beneath notice. Then he decided they were entertaining. And there's a specific kind of danger in being entertaining to someone like that, because entertainment is a thing that gets used up. You have to keep being more entertaining or you stop being worth their attention, and Corin's attention had teeth. He started small, tripping Marcus in the corridor, knocking Priya's tablet out of her hands. The sort of thing that's hard to report because it's deniable, accidental, oops, so clumsy of me. The humans took it. They'd been told to take it. The whole exchange program rested on the humans being good guests, on not making waves, on proving that this strange new species could play nice. Marcus would pick himself up and force a laugh. Priya would gather her things and say nothing. They were soldiers in a war they hadn't asked to fight, and the only weapon they were allowed was patience. Nell Corin mostly left alone at first. I think the silence unsettled him. People who need reactions to feed on, they don't know what to do with someone who gives them nothing. He'd say things to her, nasty little things, and she'd just look at him with that flat pond water stare, and he'd lose his nerve and move on to easier prey. But it gnawed at him. I could see it gnawing. A creature like Corin can't stand a thing he can't make flinch. It becomes a project. An itch. He started watching her the way she watched everyone else, and I remember thinking with a cold drop in my stomach that this was going to go badly. I just had the predator and the prey backwards. Everyone did. There was a girl named Tika. Tika was Anare, small and gentle, with these soft feathered crests that flushed pink when she was happy and went pale gray when she was scared. She was one of the youngest students on the spire, and she'd attached herself to the humans the way a small frightened thing attaches to other small frightened things. She wasn't supposed to. The Anara and the humans had no particular bond, but kindness finds its own paths, and Tika had decided the humans were safe. She'd sit with them. She'd chatter at Nell, not minding the silence, happy to talk enough for both of them. And Nell, in her way, looked after her. I saw it. The small adjustments. Nell always sat between Tika and the room, always put herself on the side the trouble was likeliest to come from. You'd miss it if you weren't watching. I'd started watching. Corin noticed Tika too. Of course he did. Predators always find the softest target. It happened in the lower atrium near the hydroponics gardens, where students went to get away from the crowds. I wasn't there for the start of it. I came in halfway, drawn by the sound, that particular high frightened keening the Anare make. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Corin had Tika backed against the railing of the garden walkway. Behind her was a 40-meter drop into the lower processing levels. He had 2 of his friends with him, other rich bored Dravani, and they were doing that thing, that hurting thing, closing the space, making it a game. Corin had Tika's wrist. He was holding her out over the railing, just a little, just enough, and laughing, and saying something about how fragile the little bird was, how easily things broke out here so far from home, how nobody would really investigate an accident, would they? Accidents happen. The spire is old and the railings are weak. Tika's crest was white as bone. She was making sounds that weren't words anymore. I shouted. I started running. And I knew, even as I ran, that I was too far away. That whatever happened in the next 5 seconds, I wasn't going to be the one who changed it. Nell was already there. I don't know how. I swear to you, I don't know how she crossed that atrium. One moment she was nowhere I could see, and the next she was simply present, the way a shadow is suddenly present when a light moves. She didn't run. That's the thing. People who run, you can see them coming. Nell just arrived. She put herself between Corin and Tika. And she looked at him. I need to slow down here, because the next part is the part nobody believes when I tell it, and I want to get it exactly right. Corin outweighed Nell by 3 times. He was a head and a half taller. His species had natural armor and claws that could open a steel door. By every measure that the galaxy uses to rank the dangerous from the safe, Corin Vault was a predator and Nell was prey. A small soft thing made of skin. She looked up at him with that empty face, and she didn't move, and she didn't speak. She just stood there between him and the girl he was about to drop into the dark, and she waited. Corin laughed. It came out wrong, though too high. I heard the crack in it. He said something. I couldn't catch all of it. Something about how this didn't concern her, how she should walk away, how he'd let her walk away just this once. He was giving her an exit. People give exits when they've started to feel the ground shift under them and they don't yet know why. Nell tilted her head, just slightly, like a thing considering a sound. And then she did the only thing I ever saw her do that you could call aggressive, and it was so small that half the witnesses didn't even register it. She raised one hand slowly and she pointed. Not at Corin, past him, at the railing, at the drop. And then she pointed at him, and then she pointed at the drop again. And she smiled. I'd never seen Nell smile. None of us had. Her face had only ever been that calm, empty pond. And the smile that came onto it now was the most frightening thing I have witnessed in my entire life, before or since. It was not a human smile, or maybe it was the most human smile there is, the one underneath all the polite ones. It said, I have already imagined doing this to you. I have imagined it in detail, and I am at peace with it. It promised something. Corin let go of Tika's wrist. He tried to save face. They always do. He pulled himself up tall and made his voice loud and said something to his friends, some joke, and they laughed too loud, the way Marcus laughed too loud, the laugh of scared people. He said something to Nell about how she was lucky, how she didn't know what she was dealing with, the Vault family, his father, consequences. Nell didn't react to any of it. She'd already turned her back on him. Turning her back, you understand, was its own message. It said, you are not a threat to me. It said, I have measured you and found nothing. For a creature like Corin, raised to believe he was the most important thing in any room, having a silent human girl turn her back on him was worse than any blow. She knelt down by Tika, helped the little Anarai up off the floor, checked her over with gentle hands, the same hands that had pointed at the drop, that had folded a paper bell. And then she walked Tika out of the atrium, slow and steady, putting herself between the girl and Corin the whole way, never once looking back. I finally reached the scene, breathless, useless, too late to have mattered. Corin and his friends were standing there in the purple half-light, and they were rattled, properly rattled. One of the friends muttered something, asking what just happened, why did they back down, they could have crushed her, and Corin snapped at him to shut up. But I saw Corin's hands, the claws, they were trembling. I filed a report that night, finally. I wrote down what Corin had done to Tika, the threat, the railing. I left out the part about Nell. I told myself it was to protect her, that nobody would believe it anyway, that it would only draw attention to a girl who clearly wanted none. The truth is, I left it out because I was afraid, not of Corin. Of her. I'd seen that smile, and some animal part of me, some old deep part that predates language and civilization and all our 9,000 years of being clever, that part of me had recognized something, had gone very still and very quiet, the way prey goes still. My clever mind didn't understand yet, but my body did. My body had filed its own report, and the report said, "That is not a small, soft thing. That is the most dangerous creature on this station, and it is only sleeping." After that, things changed in ways that were hard to point at. The harassment of the humans stopped almost completely. Not all at once, but Corin stopped. And when Corin stopped, the others who'd taken their cue from him stopped too. There's a hierarchy to bullying. It flows downhill from the top, and Corin had been the top, and now Corin wouldn't go near the humans. He'd change his route through the corridors to avoid the dining hall when they were in it. He stopped coming to the lower atrium entirely. People noticed. People always notice when a predator suddenly starts avoiding something. It tells them there's a bigger predator in the room, even if they can't see it. The students began to give the humans a wider berth, an instinctive courtesy, the way you'd give space to something you'd learned on some level to fear. And nobody could have told you why. If you'd asked them, they'd have shrugged. The humans were just. You didn't bother them, you just didn't. Especially the silent one. There started to be a story about Nell. It passed between students in the way stories do, mutating as it went, and by the time it had gone around the spire a few times, it had become something close to a ghost story. They said she could move without being seen. They said she never slept, that students on the night cycle had seen her in the corridors at all hours, just standing, just watching. They said her eyes changed in the dark. They said if you crossed her, you'd have an accident. Nobody had actually seen anyone have an accident, but that's how the best fears work. They don't need evidence. They feed on the empty spaces where evidence would be. And here's the thing that I've thought about for years. The story wasn't wrong. It was getting at something true, even though every specific detail was invented. The students had sensed a real thing about Nell, a real and terrible thing, and because they didn't have the words for it, their minds had dressed it up in ghost story clothes. The truth was both less supernatural and far more frightening than anything they imagined. The truth was just this. Nell had decided that the people she cared about would be safe, and she had quietly, completely made her peace with doing whatever that required. There was no line she wouldn't cross. There was no consequence that frightened her more than failing. And every other creature on that station, no matter how big, no matter how armored, no matter how many claws or how rich a family, every one of them had a line, a point past which they'd stop, a thing they were too afraid to lose. Nell didn't, and on some deep instinctive level, every predator on the spire had felt the absence of that line in her, the way you feel a cliff edge in the dark, and it terrified them. That's what humans are. That's the thing the galaxy didn't understand yet. It isn't that they're strong, though they are stronger than they look. It isn't that they're fast or armored or clever, though they're all of those things. It's that a human who has decided to protect something will keep coming, past pain, past reason, past the point where any sane creature lies down. They don't have an off switch. And a predator that can't be made to stop isn't a predator anymore. It's a force of nature. Tika became Nell's shadow after that. The two of them were inseparable. The little Anara had attached herself completely, and Nell, in her silent way, had accepted the responsibility utterly. It was a strange thing to watch, this fearsome silent creature and this fragile chattering bird girl moving through the station together. Tika talked enough for both of them. She'd narrate everything, her classes, her worries, the gossip, and Nell would listen with that steady attention. And sometimes the corner of her mouth would move, just slightly, the closest thing she had to a laugh. I started spending more time around them. I told myself it was professional, that I was monitoring the situation, but the truth is I'd grown to care about them. About all three humans and about Tika, who'd become an honorary fourth. We made an odd little family in that drafty, bruise-colored place. I'd bring them news from the administration. Marcus would tell terrible jokes. Priya would explain the latest political maneuvering she'd decoded. Tika would chirp and flush pink. And Nell would sit at the edge, watching the room, keeping us all on the safe side of her, and I'd feel, against all sense, protected. It was the safest I felt the entire time I was on that station, sitting in the blast radius of the most dangerous thing on it. I should have known it couldn't last. Peace like that, peace that rests on fear, it's never stable, because fear curdles. Fear, in a creature like Corin Vault, doesn't stay fear. It rots into something else. It rots into the need to make the fear go away, and there's only one way a coward knows to make his fear go away. He has to destroy the thing that causes it. Corin went quiet for almost 3 weeks after the atrium, and I, fool that I was, took the quiet for the end of it. I thought he'd learned. I thought he'd taken his bruised pride and crawled off, and that was that. What he'd actually done was go home. The Dravani had a transit lane to their moon, and Corin had family there, and family means resources, and resources mean options that a 16-year-old bully doesn't normally have. He was gone for 9 days. When he came back different, calmer, smiling more, and the calm in him was so much worse than the rage had been, because it meant he had a plan, and Corin Vault had never in his life needed a plan to get what he wanted. The fact that he had one now meant he'd finally met something he respected, something he was afraid of. He'd come back with a way to deal with Nell, and I want you to understand before I tell you what he did, that everything that followed was set in motion by a single thing. Corin Vault could not live in a universe where a small, silent human girl had made him afraid. His whole identity was built on being the apex of every room. She'd broken that, and he would rather burn the entire station down than let that break stand. I found out he was back the way you find out about weather changing. The air shifted. The students who'd relaxed went tense again. The little ecosystem of fear we'd all been living in rearranged itself, and at the center of it was Corin, smiling, patient, watching the humans with eyes that had something new in them. Resolve. The first sign that something was truly wrong came from Tika. She'd missed her morning classes. That wasn't like her. Tika was an anxious, dutiful little thing, never late, never absent. Nell noticed before any of us, of course. By the time I understood something was off, Nell was already in motion, already moving through the corridors with that silent purpose, and I half ran to keep up with her, asking questions she couldn't or wouldn't answer. We found Tika's things in the lower atrium. Her bag, her tablet, screen cracked, a scatter of her pale gray feathers on the floor, the kind that fall out when an anara is gripped hard and struggles. And on the railing, where she'd nearly been dropped weeks before, someone had left a message, scratched into the old metal with a claw, in the trade tongue. It was addressed to Nell. It said, "You took something from me. The little bird, the lower levels, come alone, come quiet, you're good at quiet." It was a trap. Anyone could see it was a trap. The lower levels of the spire were a maze of dead Threm machinery, half of it still half alive, dark and hot, and full of places where an accident could happen and never be investigated. Corin had taken Tika down there knowing Nell would come. He'd chosen the ground. He'd brought his friends, surely. He'd planned this. He was going to deal with the silent human in the one place where there were no witnesses and no rules, and he was going to make her afraid before the end, because that was the whole point. That was the thing he needed. He needed to see her afraid before he... I tried to stop her. I grabbed her arm. I told her we'd go to the administration, that this was kidnapping, a real crime, that there were proper channels. I told her it was a trap, that Corin wanted her to come alone, that she'd be walking into exactly what he'd planned. Nell looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known her, she did something that broke my heart. She reached up and she touched the side of my face, just for a moment, the way you'd say goodbye to someone you didn't expect to see again. And she shook her head, slowly. No, I won't go. No, don't follow me. Then she took the little paper bell. She must have made another one or kept one, I never knew, and she pressed it into my hand. And she closed my fingers around it. And she turned and walked into the dark of the lower levels, alone, silent, to do the thing she had already, long ago, made her peace with doing. I stood there with the bell biting into my palm, and I understood, finally and completely, what I had been living next to all these months. Not a monster, not a predator, not really. Those words are too small. A guardian. The kind the universe makes when it takes everything else away from someone, when it strips a person down past fear and past hope until all that's left is the one thing they've chosen to stand for. That's the most dangerous thing there is. Not a creature that wants to hurt you. A creature that has stopped being afraid of anything in the universe, except letting you down. I didn't listen to her. Of course I didn't. I gave her a head start and then I went down into the dark after her. I told myself it was to help. The truth is I don't know why I went. Maybe I couldn't stand the not knowing. Maybe some part of me needed to witness it, whatever it was going to be. Maybe I just couldn't let her go alone, even knowing I'd be useless, even knowing that of the two of us, I was the soft and breakable one. The lower levels of the spire were another world. The purple corona light didn't reach down there. It was lit, where it was lit at all, by the dull red glow of Threm machinery that had been running for 9,000 years without anyone telling it to stop. The heat hit you like a wall. The air was thick and wet, and it smelled of ozone and old metal and something organic underneath, something I didn't want to think about. The groaning of the station was louder down here, much louder, the deep settling moans of the dying structure all around you, so that you felt like you were inside the chest of some enormous failing animal, listening to its heart. I followed the corridor Nell had taken. I don't know how I knew it was the right one. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I was just lucky or unlucky. The passages twisted, pipes hung low. Banks of dead consoles lined the walls, and now and then one would flicker, some ancient ghost of a process stirring, casting a sick green light across the floor for a moment before dying again. And then far ahead I heard it. Tika, the high keening sound. And under it, the low, confident voice of Corin Vault, and the laughter of his friends, and the sound of something being knocked over. And I started to run, knowing I was too late, knowing I'd always been too late, knowing that whatever was about to happen in that hot red dark had been decided long before any of us arrived on the station. Had been decided in a windswept place at the end of the earth, where a small silent girl had learned that the only person who would ever protect the things she loved was herself. I ran toward the screaming. And that's where I have to stop for now, because what I found in that chamber, what Nell did, what I saw with my own eyes in the heart of that dying station, that's the part you need to hear properly. That's the part that changed how the entire galaxy thinks about humans. That's the part I've never been able to forget. I came around the last bend in that hot red corridor, and the chamber opened up in front of me, and I stopped dead, because what I was looking at didn't make sense. It was a Threm maintenance hub, I think. A big circular room, maybe 30 meters across, with a ceiling lost in shadow and machinery rising up around the walls like the ribs of something enormous. In the center of the floor there was an old power well, a deep round shaft sunk into the metal, glowing faintly from far below, and around it ran a low railing that had rusted to almost nothing. The whole room pulsed with that dull red light, and the heat shimmered the air so everything looked like it was underwater, or like a memory, or like a thing you'd see in a fever. Corin was there. His two friends were there. And Tika was there, bound at the wrists with a strip of cable, sitting against the far wall, her crest white, her small body trembling. And Nell stood in the middle of it all between Corin and Tika, alone, with her back straight and her hands loose at her sides, and she was completely calm. I pressed myself against the wall in the dark of the corridor mouth. I don't think any of them saw me. I should have done something. I had no idea what. I was a translator. My weapons were words, and the species in that room had stopped caring about words a long time ago. So I did the only thing I was good for. I watched. I witnessed. So that someone would know what happened here if none of them walked out. Corin was talking. Of course he was. Cowards talk. They have to fill the space because silence frightens them, and Nell was the silence made flesh, and she frightened him more than anything ever had, and so he talked and talked, circling her, his claws clicking on the metal floor. He was telling her how this was always going to happen, how she'd embarrassed him, made him look weak, and a vault could not look weak. Did she understand? His whole life depended on never looking weak. He told her he'd thought about it for weeks. He told her he'd realized the problem wasn't that she was strong. The problem was that everyone thought she was strong, and the only way to fix that was to show them she wasn't. He was going to make her beg. Down here, where no one could see, he was going to take that empty calm off her face and put fear there instead, and then he'd let her go back upstairs broken, and everyone would see, and the story about the silent human would die, and he'd have his room back. His apex. His world where he was the most dangerous thing in it. He'd brought the bird, he said, gesturing at Tika, because he knew the human cared about her. He'd learned that much. He'd take the bird apart first slowly and make the human watch, and that would do it, that would crack her, because she could be as fearless as she liked about her own skin, but he'd found the thing she couldn't stay calm about, hadn't he? He'd found the lever. He thought he'd found her line. He had it exactly backwards. Here's the thing nobody on that station understood, and it's the thing that's hard to explain to anyone who isn't human, and it took me years to put into words. A creature that's fighting for itself can be made to stop. You threaten it badly enough, you hurt it enough, and self-preservation kicks in and it backs down, runs, surrenders. That's how the whole galaxy worked. That's the logic every predator runs on. Find the point where the prey values its own survival more than whatever it's defending and push past that point. But Nell wasn't fighting for herself. She'd stopped doing that a long time ago, in a windswept place at the end of the earth, when whatever happened to her happened. She'd put herself down on the list of things that mattered, way at the bottom, below Tika, below the humans, below the paper bell she made for a homesick translator. And when you do that, when a person stops valuing their own survival and starts valuing only the survival of what they protect, you take away the lever. There's nothing left to push against. You can't threaten them with pain because they've already agreed to the pain. You can't threaten them with death because they crossed that bridge before they ever walked into the room. And then you make the mistake Corin made. You threaten the thing they protect. You don't find their line. You take away the last reason they had to hold back. When Corin reached down toward Tika, Nell moved. I've tried for years to describe it and I always fail. It wasn't fast the way a vor is fast, all explosive lunging. It was worse than fast. It was certain. Like watching water find the lowest point. Like watching a door that was always going to close, finally close. She crossed the space between herself and Corin and there was no wasted motion in it. No anger, no fear, nothing but a body that had decided exactly what it was going to do and was simply doing it. Corin was 3 times her size. It didn't matter. Size matters when both creatures care about getting hurt. He swung at her with one armored arm, a blow that would have shattered bone. And she wasn't where it landed. She'd read it before he threw it. Patagonia, I learned much later, is a place where you learn to read weather and animals and the small tells of violence, because reading them is the difference between living and not, and Nell had been reading the room since the moment she walked in. She knew how he'd move before he knew. She went low under the arm, inside his reach where his claws and his size meant nothing, and she did something to his knee, some twist of leverage and body weight, and the joint went the wrong way with a sound I still hear sometimes. Corin screamed. He went down. And then she was behind him, and she had his arm, and she had it bent up in a way arms don't bend, and she had her knee in his spine, and she had him, completely, this huge armored apex predator, pinned to the floor of a dying alien station by a girl made of skin and certainty. His 2 friends didn't move. They just stood there frozen, watching their leader go down in 3 seconds, and I understood that they'd never actually seen real violence before. None of them had, they'd only ever played at it, bullied and postured and held smaller things over railings. They didn't know what it looked like when something arrived that wasn't playing. Now they knew, and it had unmade them where they stood. And here's the part that matters. The part that, when I tell it, is when people finally understand. Nell had him, she could have done anything. He'd done it to himself, given her every reason, taken away every restraint. He'd threatened Tika. He'd hunted her friends for weeks. He'd lured her down here to break her. The power well was right there, 3 meters away, that deep glowing shaft, and it would have been so easy, and no one would ever have known. Accidents happen. The spire is old and the railings are weak, his own words. She had him pinned at the edge of it. His face was over the drop. He was screaming now, really screaming. The confidence gone, the apex gone, just a frightened young creature who'd finally met the thing he couldn't make stop, begging, actually begging, please, please. He was sorry. He'd leave them alone, please. She'd found his line. He had won after all. It was right there at the bottom. He wanted to live. He valued his own survival above everything, the way almost every creature in the universe does, and now that survival was in the hands of someone who had no such line of her own, and he understood in those few seconds exactly how that felt. To be small, to be soft, to be at the mercy of something that could not be reasoned with or threatened or stopped. He understood what it was to be human in a galaxy of monsters. And Nell let him understand it. She held him there at the edge for a long moment, long enough, while he begged and the heat shimmered and the station groaned around us. She leaned down close to his ear, and the silent girl who never spoke, who hadn't said a word in years, she spoke. I was too far to hear it clearly. I caught only the shape of it, 3 or 4 words, low and rough and rusty from disuse. I've spent a long time wondering what they were. Maybe never touch them again. Maybe just I see you. Maybe something only meant for him. I'll never know. And then she let him go. She stood up, she stepped back, and she left him there alive, sobbing on the floor at the edge of the drop, the apex predator of the whole station reduced to a shaking thing, alive only because she had chosen to allow it. Because that was the final difference, the one that should have terrified the galaxy most of all. She wasn't a killer. She'd had every reason and every opportunity, and she'd held them all in her hands, and she'd chosen not to. The restraint wasn't weakness. The restraint was the whole point. She could have. She chose not to. And there is nothing in the universe more dangerous than something that could destroy you completely and is choosing, moment by moment, not to. That choice was hers. It had always only been hers. And Corin would carry the weight of having been spared by her for the rest of his life. She went to Tika. She untied the cable from the little Anare's wrists with those same gentle hands, the bell-folding hands, the railing-pointing hands. She gathered the trembling bird girl up against her and held her, and I watched Nell's face over Tika's shoulder, and the empty pond was gone. There was something there now, something raw and exhausted and old, far too old for 16 years. The face of someone who keeps having to be the thing that protects, who never gets to be the one protected, who would do it all again tomorrow without hesitation and was so very, very tired. That's the face I think about, not the smile in the atrium. That tired face, holding a crying child in the red dark, having just chosen mercy for someone who deserved none, because mercy was the last thing she had that was hers to give. I came out of the shadows then. I couldn't stay hidden anymore. Nell looked up at me and she wasn't surprised. She'd known I followed her, of course she had. She knew everything in every room. She didn't look angry. She just looked at me and then down at Corin's 2 friends who were still frozen against the wall, and she made a small gesture with her head. Take them up. Tell whoever you have to tell. So I did. I helped her get Tika up the long corridors and back into the purple light. I called the administration. I told them everything this time, all of it. The kidnapping, the trap, the chamber, and yes, Nell. I left nothing out finally. Someone had to know. Someone had to witness it properly. The aftermath was complicated, the way these things always are when power and money are involved. The Vault family came. There were inquiries. There was pressure to make it all quietly disappear, because a Vault could not be seen to have been beaten and spared by a human girl, and there was a great deal of money behind making sure the story stayed buried. But it didn't stay buried. Stories like that never do. Corin's 2 friends talked. They'd seen something that had cracked their whole understanding of the universe, and they couldn't keep it in. The story went around the spire, and then it went off the spire. carried by students returning home to 40 different worlds, and it grew, the way it had grown before, mutating and swelling, until it had reached every corner of the coalition. The silent human girl, who pinned an apex predator with her bare hands, and held him over the drop and chose to let him live. People debated what it meant. The xenobiologists wrote papers. The military attachés took notes. Everyone wanted to understand the thing they'd glimpsed, this quality humans had that nothing else seemed to share. Some called it ferocity. Some called it irrationality. Some called it a kind of madness, this willingness to discard self-preservation in defense of others. I think they all missed it a little, because they kept trying to find the dangerous thing inside Nell, the weapon, the secret, the edge. And the dangerous thing was never inside her. It was in what she decided. It was a choice. Any of them could have made it. That's what truly frightened the galaxy, I think, once they understood it. Not that humans had some power the others lacked, but that humans would willingly do the thing the others were all too sensible to do, lay their own survival down. Stand between the soft thing and the dark and refuse, absolutely refuse to move, no matter what came. It isn't a power, it's a willingness, and you can't take a willingness away from someone. You can't out-muscle it or out-charm it or out-tech it. You can only meet it and discover too late that it has no bottom. Corin left the spire, went home to his moon and didn't come back. I heard, years later, that he'd changed, that he was different, quieter, that he treated the small species in his orbit with a strange and careful gentleness that nobody could account for. I like to think he carried it with him, that moment on the floor, the understanding of what it is to be at the mercy of something that owes you nothing and spares you anyway. I like to think Nell gave him something down there in the red dark, something he didn't deserve and couldn't have earned, the knowledge of his own smallness and the example of mercy given to the unworthy. I like to think it made him better. I don't know. I just like to think it. Tika never left Nell's side after that. The two of them finished the term together, the fearsome silent guardian and the bright chattering bird, and when the exchange ended they kept in contact across the long dark between their worlds, and last I heard they still do. Some bonds are forged in the kind of fire that doesn't let go. Marcus and Priya went home to Earth and went on to other things, ordinary remarkable lives. Marcus, I'm told, still laughs too loud. Priya still understands the rules faster than anyone in the room. They were brave too, in their patient, enduring way, all those weeks of taking what they were given so the exchange wouldn't fail. People forget that kind of courage because it's quiet, but it's courage all the same. And Nell finished out the term and packed her thin little bag and prepared to go back to the windswept end of the earth that had made her what she was. The night before she left, she came and found me in the common area where I always sat, where she'd left a paper bell for me a lifetime ago. She sat down across from me. She didn't speak. That one sentence in the red dark was the only time I ever heard her voice, and I think it might have been the only time she'd spoken in years. But she looked at me with that steady attention, the still pond attention, and there was warmth in it now, plain and unguarded, and we sat there together in the purple light for a long time. Just sat. Two beings from two ends of the galaxy who'd seen the same terrible thing and come out the other side as something like family. When she got up to leave, she did the thing she'd done before. She reached up and touched the side of my face, gentle, the goodbye touch. And then she pressed something into my hand and closed my fingers around it and walked away, silent as ever, out of my life and into the dark. It was the bell, of course, the paper bell. She'd kept it all that time, the one she'd pressed on me before she walked into the lower levels, the one I'd given back to her without either of us saying a word. She'd carried it, and now she gave it back for good. I have it still. It's here on my desk, as I told you, folded from a ration wrapper by the most feared predator the galaxy has ever produced. A tiny, crude, perfect little bell, made by hands that could have ended a creature 3 times their size and chose instead to make something small and kind for a homesick stranger. People ask me when I tell this story what the lesson is. They want it tied up neat. They want to know what made Nell so dangerous, as if I could hand them a list. But I think they're asking the wrong question. They want to know what made her the most feared predator in existence. And the answer is the same thing that made her gentle. The same thing that folded the bell and untied the cable from a frightened child's wrists and chose mercy over a drop into the dark. There was never a monster and a guardian in her, two separate things. It was always one thing. The willingness to give everything, herself included, for the people she decided to stand for. That willingness is the most beautiful thing a person can have and the most terrible, and they are not two things. They are the same thing, seen from two sides. The galaxy looked at humans and saw soft bodies and no claws and no armor, and decided they were prey. And then it met one quiet girl who'd stopped being afraid of anything except letting the wrong person down, and it learned all at once what the soft thing in the corner had been the whole time. Not the weakest thing in the room. The thing that had already decided it would die before it let you touch the ones it loved, and had made its peace with that so completely that nothing left in the universe could move it. That's not a predator, really. That word's too small, like I said. That's what love looks like when you strip away everything else and leave only the part that will not, under any circumstances, stand down. And there is nothing in all of creation more dangerous than that. So that's the story of the silent girl at school, the one nobody would sit with, the one the rumors swirled around, the one who never said a word and didn't need to because the most frightening things never do. I think about her every day. I ring the little bell sometimes, even though paper doesn't make a sound. It's enough to know it's there. It's enough to remember that once, in a dying place at the edge of a dead star, I sat next to the most feared creature in the galaxy and called her my friend. And she folded me a bell.